Hey, I'm Rick G. Nice to see you. Oh, have we got the microphone on? Yes, I'm Rick G. Nice to see you online. Let's see if anybody else joins us before we start. We've got under 30 seconds. And Stay Safe joins us as well. Good to see you too. Stay safe. Oh, I'm Rick's grandson. Is that? Welcome, and a sats through Akal to you guys. Right, give it another couple of seconds and we'll kick off. Right, let's get underway. Indeed. Hello, and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, it is deadline day. Yes, actually, of course, we're following the Akal Takht deadline over Punjab's anti-sacrilege law, which expires today. And with no word yet from the state government and a hardline new voice from the grassroots rejecting compromise altogether. It could be a very interesting day. Hello, Mr. 403, who's also joined us. Nice to see you online. We also have the latest on the broken promise behind the end of those CJP protests. As two states, Bihar and Assam, are forced into an embarrassing climb down, but West Bengal digs in. There's quite an interesting situation developing. And we'll take a look at the government's escalating crackdown on protest content online. Surprise, surprise. Official notices claim it's about abuse, but the evidence tells a much broader story of digital suppression. Yes, we've been there before. And the latest attempt to smear the protesters as being full of criminals. Well, this is an interesting one because you might want to stick around just to see how we can make that claim backfire spectacularly on the Indian state. So definitely stay tuned for that section. It makes quite interesting viewing. And of course, all this and loads more on today's very packed show. And of course, at the end of the show, we'll take a look at loads of great comments. So do stay tuned for that. And of course, for you guys online, do keep commenting. It's nice to see your comments popping up. I will do my best to keep an eye on them. If anything interesting pops up, I'll try to address it as we speak. But anyway, so loads to get through today. So as usual, we're going to have to rush through it all. So we're going to start, of course. Punjab, it is this very interesting situation. It is deadline day today. And as of this morning, the state government has actually let it pass without a word. Yes, indeed. Well, why does it matter? What is going on? What is this deadline? Well, you only need to go back to April when the Punjab Assembly unanimously passed that. I'm going to read out the full name of it. It's basically the Biadbi, the Sacrilege Act. But in case you need to know the full act, it is called the Jagat Jot Sri Guru Granth Sahib Satkar Amendment Act 2026. There you go. Basically, it is the Sacrilege Act. It is a law introducing strict punishments, including life imprisonment for any acts of sacrilege, Biadbi, against the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Now, of course, as we've covered this to great extent and great detail, on the surface, it does actually sound like exactly the kind of protection the Sikh community has demanded for years. What is wrong with that? And especially, of course, after the trauma of repeated sacrilege incidents over the past decade. But the Akal Takht, of course, the highest temporal seat of Sikh authority, immediately raised serious objections because, of course, the whole scholarly and academic section of the Sikh community immediately saw it for exactly what it was. Now, the objections were not to the principle of punishing sacrilege, but of course to how that law was written and how it was passed. So the Akal Takht central complaint was one of basically a process. And the legislation touches the handling and reverence of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji itself. And yet that legislation was drafted and passed without any consultation with the Akal Takht or the Shirmani Gurdwara Parliament Committee, the SGPC, or indeed any consultation actually with any Sikh organisation. And several MLAs, members of the Legislative Assembly, did later admit in front of the Akal Takht itself, in front of the Jatadar and that panel upon which they were summoned on their knees, effectively, that they admitted they had voted for the bill without actually reading it, because copies were reportedly circulated only around at the very last minute, so they never actually had a chance even to read it before they had to vote on it. So, unsurprisingly, bad law was passed. Now, that admission did come during that extraordinary hearing, and it happened at the end of June the 29th, when the Akal Takht summoned every Sikh MLA and cabinet minister in Punjab, right across party lines, to come to the Akal Takht and explain themselves. Basically, the headmaster summoned all the naughty boys before him. But at the end of that hearing, the acting Jatadar, Jani Kuldeep Singh Gargaj, issued a very clear ultimatum. The government had 1 month to amend the law in line with the Akal Takht's objections. And until then, its implementation would be held in abeyance. In other words, it is not going to be used. It is not going to be allowed to come into law until this deadline is passed. Now, that deadline, 1 month deadline, expired right now, today. And according to the Tribune, speaking just hours ago, the Jatadar confirmed that the Akal Takht Secretariat has received no communication whatsoever from the Punjab government since that hearing. And his words, actually worth repeating directly, he actually said, "Today is the last day. Let's see what happens. I do not believe any Sikh would come before the Akal Takht, make a commitment and later go back on it. They will fulfill it, but they have not contacted us so far." Interesting words. There is a lot of restraint in that statement. It's a very diplomatic statement. There is an insistence on giving that Bhagwant Man government the benefit of the doubt, even as this silence stretches on. But that restraint is, of course, not shared by everyone in the Panth. There are those who feel a little bit more strongly about this whole situation and less diplomatic, because today a very different message emerged from the ground, the grassroots level. An organisation called the Sikh Jata Malwa, they are an organisation that very much represent the Panth on the ground in Punjab, and certainly advocate for everything that is Sikhi. They have publicly called for the repeal of not just this 2026 Act, but the actual original earlier 2008 sacrilege law that it was based upon as well. They flatly rejected the entire amendment-based approach that the Akal Takht itself has been pursuing. And their position is actually a lot more fundamental and a lot more straightforward. Matters concerning the reverence of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji should sit entirely within the authority of the Guru Khalsa Panth and exercised through only the Akal Takht, not within any government's legal framework, amended or otherwise. So again, totally understandable, but totally uncompromising stance. And it matters because what this does, it does expose a fault line that goes beyond just this one single law. The Akal Takht approach has been very measured, very diplomatic, as indeed it always is. Work within the process, let's negotiate those objectionable clauses, give the government a defined window to do something about it. But of course, Sikh Jata Malwa's position argues that negotiation itself already concedes something that should never have been given up in the first place for negotiation: the state's right to legislate on matters of Sikh religious doctrine at all. Which actually, if you think about it, why has the Akal Takht bowed down and compromised with the Indian government when, in fact, as grassroots have pointed out, this should not even be open for negotiation? The principle is absolutely unambiguous. The state should have absolutely no involvement in something like this. Anyway, so where does it leave things now, tonight, as this deadline passes? Well, the Akal Takht has, of course, the moral authority to escalate, and it has shown before with its what was called the Duru Doki declaration, that is the standing against the gurus, that declaration against Chief Minister Bhagwant Man earlier this year, and I did talk about that at the time. And it has shown that it is willing to use its authority, the Akal Takht, decisively. So whether today's silence from Chandigarh becomes this escalation tomorrow, or indeed whether the government actually does move quietly behind the scenes to try and avoid a repeat of that earlier confrontation, really is this big question that's hanging over Punjab skies this evening. So what is already clear is that the patience within the Panth is not universal. It's not going to go on forever. And the government's delay is now creating space for this harder line position to grow. It's basically essentially provoking the Sikh Panth. So, and it is also worth remembering how quickly this same dynamic between the Akal Takht and the Bhagwant Mann government has escalated before, because back in June, if you recall, the Panj Singh Saiban went as far as declaring the chief minister himself Guru Dokhi, that standing against the principles of the Guru, essentially a traitor to the Guru. And it ordered a social and religious boycott against him, following a separate dispute over that video, which again we talked at great length about. Now, the government rejected that ruling as politically motivated at the time. So the government just said, not interested. But the episode did show that when the Akal Takht believes it has been disrespected or ignored, it is quite happy and very totally prepared to use its full weight of its moral authority, and consequences for the ruling party be damned. In other words, we don't care about what the government says. We don't care what the state government in Punjab says. We are the Akal Takht. Cross us if you dare. And that history is really why today's silence is huge. It carries so much weight, and a lot more weight than just a simple missed deadline. The Akal Takht is not a court that issues fines or a legislature that can be voted out. It's something very different. The Akal Takht's power rests entirely on the willingness of Sikhs in Punjab and indeed across the diaspora to recognize its authority as binding. In other words, what the Akal Takht says essentially represents the whole Sikh community, the whole Sikh Panth globally. So every time a government treats that authority with disrespect, treats it even almost as optional, or just something to be managed rather than answered, basically disrespected or ignored, it's essentially testing exactly how far that recognition extends in practice. So the Sikh Jata Malwas, that organisation's intervention today, does suggest that for a growing section of the Sikh Panth, the answer is, well, not very far at all. And that outright repeal, not further negotiation, is now the only acceptable outcome. So, in other words, the Sikh Panth's position now appears to have gone back from what the Jatadar originally said a month ago, saying we need to negotiate or else. It's now moved even further back, saying we're not even going to negotiate now. There isn't a negotiation. That whole raft of legislation, all the way back to the early 2000s, goes completely. We're not even going to discuss any amendments or clauses. The whole thing goes. In other words, it's a much harder line position. Now, it is worth being clear about why this matters so much as the underlying protections about the whole Guru Granth Sahib Ji issue. Nobody in this whole dispute, not the Akal Takht, not Sikh Jata Malwa, not even the Mann government publicly is arguing against punishing sacrilege. That argument is all agreed, all parties agree on that side of the argument. The argument is entirely about who gets to define what sacrilege means. That is the crucial issue. Who gets to decide how the Guru Granth Sahib Ji is handled in law, and whether a state assembly, politicians, can settle those questions on its own. In other words, it is a sovereignty question, basically wearing the clothes of some sort of technical amendment dispute. And it is exactly the kind of question that we do need to keep returning to, because again, it's this key word, sovereignty. It is sovereignty over the Holy Scriptures. And that sovereignty can only belong to the Sikh people. It cannot belong even to a secular state. It certainly cannot belong to politicians. Indeed. So as Stay Safe says, the Indian state feels ashamed. Indeed it does. It should well do. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how this pans out. So, and talking of New Delhi, and about what happens after the cameras move on. The CJP protest and the students' protest, these protests that have been going on over the last few days and have made international headlines. Now, this is great. I love this photo. You remember a lot of coverage that we've done of this cockroach Janata Party's protests at Jantar Mantar in New Delhi. And of course, what followed was that actually, on the face of it, that huge success of that resignation of Union Education Minister, a guy called Dharmendra Pradhan, that did follow upon their demands. Well, after weeks of pressure over that whole sort of exam paper leak scandal, and when that deal was struck, of course, it wasn't just about the Education Minister's job. Union Minister, a guy called J.P. Nadda, gave an explicit public commitment on behalf of the Indian government. And his words on the record said, the core of their 4-point requirement was that no action or FIRs should be taken, and if any exist, they should be withdrawn, whether filed by Delhi police or in any BJP-ruled state. We will provide them copies of those FIRs, and upon withdrawal, no further action will be pursued. So that was the deal. That went on record by a union minister. So as a result of that on-the-record statement, the CJP called off their protest. The prosecution stopped. Existing cases are withdrawn. That's the deal. It's very straightforward. But of course, what actually happened tells a very different story. And as I said in yesterday's show, the truth starts to slowly filter out just after the event, what actually has happened and still is happening. So in the days following that promise, arrests continued. Not just continued, but accelerated. Hundreds of students were then arrested in Bihar and West Bengal, with police invoking sections related to attempted murder and rioting, alongside other fairly questionable charges over disobedience. In Delhi and other states, volunteers who had simply been helping with protest logistics were reportedly surveilled, they were detained, they were harassed, they were intimidated. In other words, the police just carried on with that overreach, with their brutality, completely ignoring everything that had been promised by the government to end the protests. So, unsurprisingly, the CJP have not stayed quiet. Now, their spokesperson, I can't even say that word. It's been a long day. Their spokesperson, a guy called Ashutosh Ranka, he posted a direct public ultimatum, here it is, addressed to JP Nadda and Union Minister Jitendra Singh. He laid out the breach in stark terms. We are observing a complete breach of the agreement regarding no police action against protesters. Multiple reports are emerging in Delhi around detention of volunteers supporting protesters with logistics. Now, his demand was blunt. It was the immediate withdrawal of all FIRs, as promised, release of all the detained students, and a copy of the written agreement, or that protest will just continue. And the All India Cockroach Party's own social media channels, here it is, this is their Facebook channel. They put it very simply. Mr. Modi, you can't fool us. Act on the agreement or Gen Zs will be on the streets again to protect their brothers and sisters. I mean, what was Mr. Modi and his ministers thinking? That they could just break the promise and everybody just go home happily? I mean, it's just the naivety of the Indian government is actually quite surprising in this. And here is actually where the story becomes actually genuinely interesting, because the response actually, and there's a lot of nuances here, and it does give a lot of insight into Indian politics. And bear with me on this, because it is important. Facing mounting criticism and the explicit threat of renewed protests, well, the Bihar and Assam governments backed down straight away, immediately. So those two states, Bihar up in the north, Assam over in the east, they said, yep, absolutely, they backed down. And both states announced that all cases registered against protesters would immediately be withdrawn. Anyone detained before 6 p.m. on July the 26th would be released. So well done to those states. But West Bengal did not follow suit, interestingly. And don't forget, West Bengal elections recently, the BJP inserted a whole raft of dirty tricks to take control of West Bengal state. So Chief Minister Suvendu Adhikari of West Bengal state, he did not do what Assam and Bihar had done. He, in fact, quite the opposite. He doubled down. He dismissed the protesters as what he called Jamati fundamentalists, attempting to weaken India and create chaos. And that's rhetoric that stands in sharp contrast to what the other two states, actually, ironically, the BJP governed states, also said, with the exact same breach of the exact same promise. So, in other words, the message in West Bengal was absolutely the opposite. And it's worth pondering on that just for a moment, because it tells you something about how these commitments actually function in real life, in practice. So a national promise made on camera by a senior minister, central government minister, turned out to have distinctly regional enforcement. In other words, it doesn't matter what central government says, it matters about the regional governors and if they are going to actually enact what central government says. Because in those states, where the political cost of ignoring it became too high, and they resisted where a state government calculated it could weather the criticism. In other words, in those specific states where they thought we can actually get away with ignoring central government's order, we'll do it. Because our position in that state politically is so strong that there is nothing that our local protesters can do about it. But contrast that with Assam, Bihar, where those state governments are in such a relatively weak position that they thought we better bow down because we're in trouble if we don't. So essentially, in other words, it's not a technical failure of communication between Delhi and those states. It's a demonstration of exactly how much a public assurance to a protest movement is worth when it collides with a state government's own political instincts. Of course, that has relevance, of course, in Punjab. So anyway, as I say, it's a subtle point, but it's an important point to understand in terms of course, when we talk about Punjabi politics particularly, and how the Punjabi government reacts or acts when diktats come from New Delhi. Anyway, so the human dimension of this whole story, of course, hasn't gone away. And Rajya Sabha MP, Sakit Gokhale, if I pronounce his name correctly, he's the Trinamool Congress's national spokesperson. So he's essentially one of the opposition. He's been actively working to document the underlying police conduct himself. Well done to this guy. He's actually realized the brutality that's been happening on the streets. And he's appealed directly to the public. Did you manage to film any part of it? If yes, please share the video. This will help identify the officials who assaulted protesters so that legal action can be taken against them. You will remain completely anonymous. So it is a reminder that behind the political back and forth between Delhi and the states sits a genuine ongoing effort, thank heavens, to hold individual officers accountable for what happened on the ground, that brutality, that violence, regardless of course, which government eventually decides to honor its word. So again, this is extraordinarily important that somebody at least, and don't forget, those police officers were deliberately removing their identification so that anybody who was attacked, injured, or maimed, as many have been, by police officers, they couldn't be identified. So this guy is appealing. If you've got any camera footage, photographs, video footage, please, please, please send it in so that we can identify those guilty and stop them escaping justice. Because, of course, removing the identification was all about escaping justice. It's a common theme with the Indian government. So it is also worth remembering that this movement, the CJP movement, was actually what it really was about its core. That whole exam paper leak scandal, it wasn't an abstract administrative failure. It was a scandal that actually carried with it a genuine body count. People died because of this scandal. And families across India lost their children to suicide when that system collapsed under the weight of leaked papers and corruption. And it was that grief, as much as the political anger, that really motivated those tens of thousands of young Gen Z protesters onto the streets in the first place. So when the union minister, Nada, stood up and promised no further punitive action, that wasn't just a political concession to end an inconvenient protest. It was, in effect, a promise that grieving families and frightened students would not be any further punished for demanding accountability. So again, the Indian government has genuine blood on its hands because of this corruption. And that is what makes the gap between the promise and the reality in Bihar, Bengal, those other states, so hard to explain away as just a simple bureaucratic mix-up. The CJP chief spokesman, Saurav Das, put it very clearly in his own warning to the government. This guy said, such breach of trust will be completely unacceptable to the youth. So the simple words, but powerful words that send an extraordinarily important warning to the government. Don't forget the young have a lot less to lose. It is the young who often bring down governments. So there is a veiled warning there. And the party's account of events is that it called off a genuinely nationwide protest movement specifically because it received that assurance from the government. Not from a state government, not from a police commissioner, but from central government. And that promise was that punitive action would stop. And if that assurance turns out to hold only in states where the political cost of ignoring it is high enough, then the lesson for any future protest movement negotiating with this government is pretty clear. Get it in writing. Don't expect it to travel far beyond the cameras that were watching when that promise was made. So we're going to keep a close eye on this, obviously, and whether, particularly West Bengal, that state that's refused to honour the promise made by the Indian government, and if they will follow Bihar and Assam's lead over the next few days, or whether this hard line becomes a template that other BJP states might actually then adopt once national attention moves elsewhere. In other words, Bihar and Assam, once the cameras and the attention's moved away and forgotten about the story, that might be when they will start clamping down. But anyway, we'll keep a track of this story as the numbers are reported, and we'll bring you Gokali, if that's his name, his findings as his evidence gathering effort develops, as he hopefully does collect all that evidence. Now, there's one more thread, and this is, I think, in my personal opinion, this is the most interesting thread about this whole story. And it actually made me laugh because it's something that has backfired spectacularly on the Indian government. Nobody else has raised this yet. So you heard it here first. It is a thread that's worth pulling on because it's already been used to reframe this whole narrative. Delhi police, in a lot of their publicity and a lot of the stuff that they put online, and indeed Hindutva have leveraged as well. They have sources from the Delhi police have told the Govt media that a screening of 2,873 people present at and around those Jantar Mantar protest sites found that over 980 of them, around 34%, have previous criminal records, including cases of murder, attempted murder, robbery, rape, kidnapping, narcotics offences. And that figure is now doing the rounds as evidence that this wasn't really a student movement at all. It was one that was infiltrated by habitual offenders and serious criminals. I've seen it myself right across social media. All the IT cells have been pumping out these stories that, yeah, murder, rape, dacoity, accused at and around CJP protest site. In other words, it's a very clear attempt to smear the protest. So let's start analysing this. Firstly, present at and around the protest site is what they claim. That's not the same as protester. Now, Jantar Mantar and Sansad Marg, where these protests were, are busy public areas. And that screening pool that they refer to is, of course, going to include bystanders, vendors, anybody, not even protesting, but just happens to be in that general area. In other words, plenty of people with absolutely no connection to the CJP whatsoever. But secondly, and more importantly, a criminal record in this context, exactly as with the figures we're about to look at, generally means a past FIR, first information report, or accusation, but not a conviction, something very different. Because here's the comparison worth actually making. And this is where it gets very interesting and where it starts backfiring. According to the Association of Democratic Reforms, 46% of the 543 MPs elected to the Lok Sabha in 2024, 251 of them have declared criminal cases against themselves in their own sworn election affidavits. 31%, 170 MPs, face serious criminal charges, including murder, attempted murder, rape, kidnapping, crimes against women. And of the BJP's own 240 winning MPs, 94, that's 39% of BJP MPs have declared criminal cases. And just as with the protest site figures, the overwhelming majority of those are accusations, not convictions. Only 27 of the 251 have actually been found guilty of anything. But let's compare oranges with oranges. So if we sit those two numbers side by side, roughly 34% of a mixed crowd screened in and around a protest site have a criminal record. 34%. 46% of the country's sitting Lok Sabha members, the people who write the laws, declare one themselves voluntarily on their own paperwork. So if a criminal record is meant to delegitimize a gathering of ordinary citizens and students, well, it's worth asking the question, what standard that leaves for the Parliament passing judgment on them? In other words, it's backfired beautifully. Nobody seems to have picked up on this. We immediately throw this laughable accusation out and throw in their faces 46% of the Lok Sabha have criminal offences, including murder, rape, kidnapping, etc. So the phrase in English is stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Anyway, let's move on. And the Punjab Times, 29. Good morning to you, sir, as well. Nice to see you online. So I'm chuckling. I chuckled when, as soon as I saw that headline, I thought, oh, this is going to be so easy. Because I know, you guys know, the Lok Sabha is full of criminals. So for the Indian government to come out with a statement like that, it's easy meat for us. Anyway, so the final story, and it does actually follow directly on from that last one, because the fallout from the CJP protests hasn't stayed confined to the streets or the courts. It is, of course, unsurprisingly, it's moved online, as these things obviously tend to do. So here is the government's official position, and it is worth stating plainly and, of course, fairly. Delhi police say they have been issuing legal notices to social media accounts and formally writing to X, Twitter, over posts they describe as abusive, malicious, or defamatory toward the Prime Minister and security forces. Content that surfaced during and after those Jantar Mantar protests. So police officials say that, look, this is a routine legal process, that their social media monitoring identifies content that allegedly violates the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita Act, or basically the IT Act as we know it. It sends notices, and account holders are then asked to explain themselves before any further action is then taken. Now, notices have reportedly gone out to individuals, to independent journalists, and some media platforms, with police asking X itself directly to hand over identifying details of account holders. So that is the stated justification, an abuse and defamation crackdown, not a protest crackdown. So that's the official line coming from the Indian government. Now, here is what independent experts and independent digital rights monitors are actually documenting. In other words, here is the reality with the evidence. Because, of course, surprise, surprise, the gap between what the Indian state says and what's actually really happening is massive. The Internet Freedom Foundation and the tracking site Media Nama have been keeping a running evidence-based log of takedowns connected to this period. And abusive content aimed at the Prime Minister is actually only a small part of what's on that list. A journalist's Instagram reel covering the protests for DW News, as an example, was geo-blocked. I'll come on to that in a moment, what that means. The CJP's own account, with 20 million followers, was itself partially restricted. And crucially, in several of these cases, authorities have geo-blocked or restricted content without naming the specific law or order under which they're acting. The IFF's own words on this are very clear and pointed. The secrecy compounds the illegality. So the pattern extends well beyond formal government notices. Reports have emerged that IIT Madras asked its own students to take down posts supportive of the CJP protests, reportedly warning that such posts could, quote, disrupt the institution's relationship with the central government. In other words, it might embarrass the institution in its relationship with the government. And AAP's, Aam Aadmi Party's Delhi unit president, a guy called Saurabh Bharadwaj, has alleged that WhatsApp was suspending accounts simply for sharing status updates about the movement. And one of the protesters, a guy called Abhinav Bish, he had an Instagram account. It grew to over 500,000 followers during that demonstration. And he said his account was suspended entirely. So he's now having to post from a totally new account under a new hashtag #BringBackIsaac. But he is, of course, appealing to supporters to help them rebuild what was taken down. In other words, there is this whole raft of social media accounts and outlets being completely closed down or restricted. So, a useful distinction to hold on to, this word geo-blocking. Let me talk about geo-blocking because this is important. Geo-blocking, it's not a global block. It's not just closing down a post or even a channel. Content restricted inside India under geo-blocking. Geo-blocking basically means you can block geographical areas from seeing a channel or a post. So geo-blocking, as I said, it's not a global, it's a regional or a local restriction. And content restricted inside India under these notices remains fully visible to anyone outside the country. So I can see it here in the UK. And the journalists themselves, they can see their own reel. But if you're in India with an Indian IP address, you can't see it. It's hidden from you. And it basically, it's suppression and censorship that is very precise. It's geographically targeted, but importantly, it's largely invisible to anyone not looking for it. And that is exactly why these independent trackers like Media Nama and the IFF matter, because they're documenting this. They are tracking this. They can see this. And that documentation, without that evidence, this would simply be a story about a routine police notice regarding a handful of abusive posts. It's not, because thanks to these monitors, they have managed to identify these geo-blocks on all these accounts. So you start to see how insidiously evil and undemocratic this is. So under this so-called umbrella of, it's defamation, it's national security, it's the usual arguments. In reality, what they're doing is they're closing any dissent, any political dissent, any support for the protesters, but they're doing it in such a devious way that those accounts don't realize it's happening. They'll obviously see their views drop inexplicably. They think, well, I'm still online because they can still see it. We out here can still see it, but everybody in India can't see it. You start to see it, you understand how evil that is and how undemocratic it is. That is what they're up to. Again, to use a phrase I use often, it stings. And into this gap actually has stepped a pretty unusual and direct response. This guy again, Saket Gokhale, he's that same Trinamool MP working to document the police brutality against the protesters. He's now actually waded into this as well. He's now launched a dedicated campaign specifically for this, restore.trinamool.in. And his message to affected users is direct. The Modi Shah government is issuing takedown notices, a brazen violation of your digital rights. Protesting is your right. Of course it is. In any democracy, so-called democracy, it is your human right. Hello, Gurpreet Pal Singh. Khalistan Zindabad. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. So basically, the offer is simple. Submit your takedown details, and his office says it will take the case up directly with both the government of India and the platform itself upon which it was geo-blocked. On their behalf, on the user's behalf, at no cost and with no personal information required to make the initial submission. I mean, what a great offer. Well done to this guy. Fantastic. Now, for now, the campaign is explicitly limited to takedowns connected to the students' protests, though he does say he does intend to widen it, as obviously far and wide as he can. So ultimately, I mean, whatever you make of the politics behind this whole sort of offer, and it is unmistakable, it is a political offer from an opposition party, so obviously it's opportunistic, but it exists because that real gap is there. Ordinary students, journalists, protesters currently have very few accessible avenues to challenge a geo-block that cites no law and names no authority. In other words, it's totally illegal in any democracy to do this. So until that changes, do expect more accounts like Gokali's to fill that space to try and help, hopefully, the protesters and freedom of speech. And of course, this argument over where legitimate content moderation ends and political suppression begins, that argument's just going to run and run well after these protests finish. I've absolutely no doubt. But there is, of course, and it is, yeah, absolutely stay safe. It is all about free press. And don't forget, let me remind you that the Global Free Press Index, India sits, I think, currently about 159th out of 183 countries. I mean, 159th. It is in the bottom part, the bottom pile, near North Korea, China, Russia, Iran. This is where India sits in the Free Press Index, and it calls itself a democracy. A free press is one of the most important elements, the fundamental foundations of a democracy is a free press. So when we say India is no longer a democracy, if indeed it ever was, the evidence is out there for anybody to see. So there is, of course, a broader pattern that's worth flagging, because this isn't the first time internet and platform controls have, of course, followed any sort of protest movement in India. Authorities have always reached out for restrictions on communications, on connectivity, and those platform level takedowns, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc., always during moments of unrest. The first thing the Indian state does is they close down the internet. They stop communications under Section 69A of the IT Act, that insidiously dangerous, undemocratic act. And it is the same provision that's been used over and over historically to block content with minimal public transparency. And that's the important part. There's no transparency about it. It doesn't explain under what authority or why it does what it does. Again, totally undemocratic. But what is different this time is the scale of independent documentation running alongside it in actually near real time, because those groups like the IFF and Media Nama, they are now publishing a live evidence-based tracker. In other words, the Indian state has a worthy foe. It means that any suppression tactics designed to be quiet and diffuse and subtle and secret, a little geo-block here, a suspended account there, no global headline, no single dramatic shutdown, it's all very subtle and secret and stealth. Not anymore. It's being logged and cross-referenced in real time by these people. And it does matter for how this story then develops from here. Because in the past, this kind of dispersed stealth content moderation has been much harder to challenge, mainly because no single victim story was big enough on its own to then force some sort of massive policy reversal after huge pressure. A suspended account here, a block reel there, it's easy for the government to describe it as isolated. It doesn't really matter. But what these campaigns by Gokali particularly, and of course the independent trackers, what they're effectively doing is aggregating all those individual cases into a pattern that's much harder to wave away and dismiss. Now, whether that aggregation does indeed translate into any actual policy, or just simply becomes another data point in this ongoing argument about press freedom, well, we'll see. But anyway, there you go. It's fascinating stuff. But as I often say, watch this space because we'll keep an eye on this. But clearly, as always, the truth is slowly but surely filtering out. The protests have sort of, for now, been and gone, but it does look like they're going to come back. And the truth of what actually happened on the ground is now coming out like this sort of mushroom. It's exploding out of that darkness of news. It's quite shocking, as these things always tend to be. So anyway, let's move on, and I'm going to go into the comments as always. Thank you to you guys, loads of comments as always, much appreciated. Thank you for all your support as always. So I'm just looking at the live comments. Nice to see you, Amrit, commenting as well. Stay safe in there. Mergiv logs, Rinku's here as well. Punjab solution, Khalistan only. Absolutely, couldn't say it better myself. Nice of you. Nice to see you online. And John Smith joined us. RSS Children Congress. Oh, good heavens, too long to read, but good heavens, it's so good. He said it 3 times. Anyway, it's lots of words there. But hang on, don't keep repeating it. All you're doing is filling out the comments. I'm just trying to read what you said. Hindup the terrorist, cockroach socialist, Hindup the terrorist. Well, yes, okay. Thank you. You've made your point. Much appreciated. Anyway, right, let's get on with the comments. Anyway, the important comments. Right, Kuldeep Kaur. Hi, Kuldeep. Thanks for kicking us off today. All to do with Bishnoi. And of course, Anmol Bishnoi, Lawrence's younger brother, in this story I did a couple of days ago about this, again, this sort of state sort of cover-up once again. Yeah, who is Bishnoi? We've talked a lot about Bishnoi, but as you say, Kuldeep, the question is really, what is he? Is he really an asset of the Indian state? Is he living the life of a king in that prison? That is the big question. And you claim, actually, I think in your comment, you claim, look, it's the Govt media that actually claim that he's living like a king. I don't think it is. I think it's people like us saying he's actually being very well and truly looked after. And that could only happen if he's, working alongside or at least complicitly with the Indian state. But as you sum up, basically, with India's track record, you wouldn't be surprised if Bishnoi is an agent working for India. I mean, our narrative is very clear. Of course he is. I mean, it's just almost impossible for him not to be, with all the evidence that's come out. And the Sikh Jedi, I've not seen you online today, Sikh Jedi, but anyway, the Sikh Jedi pops in with actually our party line here, which we have absolutely no doubt about, is that Bishnoi is an agent of RAW, the Research and Analysis Wing. Interesting that you put a bit of context there. His father was a constable in Haryana Police, and he himself studied law. In fact, I've talked about this before. He's a law graduate from the University of Chandigarh, where he met his girlfriend, Gildi Bra. You said that, I didn't, right? But yeah, I mean, and I often say Lawrence Bishnoi is a waste of talent, because he could have gone in 2 totally different directions in life. Clearly, this guy has a huge amount of skill and talent. He's built a global, massive empire. But it is a criminal empire. If he'd gone into business legitimately, and clearly a very intelligent guy, just think what he could have achieved legitimately on the right side of the law. Again, I just say it's tragic. It's what a waste of a life. I mean, if Lawrence is ever released, I assume he will do one day. Maybe he might just stop and think, you know what? I can actually become extraordinarily wealthy and successful if I tread the right side of the law. Anyway, that's him. Anyway, this was an interesting thread, and it's interesting because there's a bit of a counter narrative going on here. Hobo popped in. I think Hobo was on watching us live yesterday at the time, and Hobo says, talking about Govt Singh Panoon, he's trying to latch onto an authentic protest and bend it toward his separatist agenda. And exposes how little real relevance he has. He's desperate, he's frustrated, etc., etc. And the Sikh Jedi actually pops in. Yeah, he's divisive, clout-chasing grifter. Glad I'm not the only one thinking. You see, this is interesting, actually, because I have a lot of time for Govt Singh Panoon. And I'll tell you why. It's very easy to really just sort of take, as we can say in English, take the mickey out of him. He's very bombastic. He is very sensational. If you look at all his posts, his videos, it's very sensationalized. His rhetoric is really, as I say, the word is bombastic. But he serves a purpose, because the Khalistan movement has to be successful, it has to be multilateral. It's got to cover all the bases. Now, at the legal foundational basis. We've got organizations like the Sikh Federation International, for example, that is doing extraordinarily good work with the United Nations, global organizations, with international governments, like in Azerbaijan, for example, to push the Khalistan cause legally. And everything to do with that, should we say, the very dry, boring administrative work that needs to be done to establish a new nation. In the middle, we've got you guys, the wonderful Khalistan supporters, all of us, you guys all around the world in the diaspora, who are out there, come rain or shine, with the Khalistan flags, flying them, even small protests where there's 2 or 3 of you, all the way up to the mass referendum turnouts. You guys are in the middle, doing that education for the public, educating the public about what the Khalistan cause. And then at another end, we've got Gurpatan Singh Panoon, who you guys clearly just dismiss. But he also has a role to play, because he's on social media appealing to people who aren't interested in the other stuff. But they might actually be seduced into the concept of Khalistan because Gurpatan actually speaks their language. So you see, we need all these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle in place to win over as many people as possible to the cause. That is why. So yeah, I get what you're saying, but don't dismiss Gurpatan. And Amrik says, my granddad would love to meet you and buy you a cold coffee. That would be much appreciated. Maybe we can sort that out. We'll see. Hopefully it's, are you in the UK? I think you are, aren't you? We'll have to sort of arrange something at some get together. We'll sort something out, because of course I'd love to meet a lot of you guys in the flesh. It's nice to sort of see you virtually speaking and get your YouTube names, but it'd be quite nice to shake your hands and sat through Akal face to face, etc. So anyway, we'll see on that. But anyway, so this was an interesting thread, and then it sort of evolved. And Danny, one of our regular commenters over the last couple of days, he waded in, talking about Sikhs generally. And this was quite an interesting comment. Sikhs are successful in business, but not in the political field, nor leading countries. They are not destined to rule. That is a huge statement, and we don't actually have time to talk at great length about it, much as I would love to, because it's interesting that you think that, because actually there's a lot of evidence to say, no, actually that is not the case. Certainly they are successful in business. As I often say, Sikhs, wherever they go around the diaspora, have built commercial empires. They've been extremely successful because they are driven, they are motivated to succeed wherever they land. But when you say Sikhs are not successful in politics or as leaders, actually that is not true. And not destined to rule. There's lots of evidence that Sikhs are successful in politics. There are many, many successful Sikh politicians. I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of Swaranjit Singh Khalsa, who's the new first mayor in Norwich, Connecticut, in the US. Just one example, just off the top of my head. There is Canada, you guys in Canada, what was his name? Oh, my name's gone blank. It's my age, but my mind's gone blank. The ruler, Jagdeep Singh. Jagdeep Singh, the ruler of the NDP, leader of the NDP in Canada. So there are Sikhs at high-profile levels right across the world. We've got 12 Sikh MPs here in the UK. So you cannot say that Sikhs are not successful in politics. And then when it comes to leading countries not destined to rule, I only need to remind you of one of the greatest empires in history and one of the greatest leaders in history, Maharaja Ranjit Singh of the Sikh Empire back in the 19th century. They were rulers of an empire that spanned a huge geographical region and was respected throughout the world, particularly in Europe. So again, they have proved themselves as successful rulers. Now, the big question is, are they destined to rule? Yes, actually, they probably are. In fact, let's remove that word. Probably they are destined to rule. This is what the whole Khalistan movement is about. I know you reject it, but all the evidence for this direction of travel is very clear. Khalistan is coming, and it will be ruled under a unique democratic system of Panj Pyari, I think it's called. And it will not be a Sikh theocracy. It might not even have Sikh leaders, but it will be a nation built on total egalitarian principles. And that is why, interestingly, It might not be ruled by Sikhs. It might be ruled by a Hindu. I know you guys are saying what, but this is the fundamental principle that I'm trying to explain, is that the new Sikh empire, the new Khalistan, could literally, because of its ultimately democratic system, if they feel somebody from a completely different faith is the best leader for Khalistan, he will, or she will, that's an important, again, egalitarian statement, he or she will then lead Khalistan. That is the point. So, anyway. And the Sikh Jedi, this is, again, another interesting comment. Despite Punjab being self-governed during the Sikh Empire, was any other part of India self-governed ever? And this, I think, was in response, actually, to Danny. And this is really sort of, because Danny is obviously Pakistani, or at least he's a Pakistani nationalist. And so the Sikh Jedi responds, saying, well, okay, let me throw it back at you. You name any other part of India that was self-governed ever. And it hasn't. This is what the Sikh Empire was. India was basically handed to you guys in Pakistan on a plate. You didn't fight for it, really. You didn't build it yourselves. The British built it for you and then handed it over to you. That's the point. Are you destined to rule? And again, this actually, I have to say, Sikh Jedi, this was a wonderful riposte to everything that Danny's said and Danny's sort of dismissal of Sikhs. Because essentially all Danny's Pakistani nationalism, and don't get me wrong, I'm totally friendly with Pakistan. I have nothing against Pakistanis whatsoever. But when Danny wades in to say, we built Pakistan and we are, the ultimate nation because we did it right. No, as the Sikh Jedi says, in reality, it was handed to you on a plate by the British. You didn't fight for it. You didn't create it. You didn't build it. It was given to you. Which, again, thank you, Sikh Jedi. I couldn't have put it better myself. A great comment. Satbachan Singh. Just look at the clock. You've got a few minutes. Satbachan Singh. This was slightly broken English, so I'll try and interpret what was said. Thank you, anyway, for your long comment. But basically, I think it's actually a very philosophical comment. Essentially, it's about how humanity really, actually, to sum it up probably better, is it should actually follow the Sikh faith. Because, and again, this mirrors something in Christianity. And I think the statement in the Bible, if I'm really blowing the dust off my own brain, I think it's easier to pass through the eye of a needle than it is to enter the gates of heaven. Basically, if you're wealthy, in other words, you can accumulate all the wealth you want in life, but if you haven't led a good life, you ain't coming in. And I think this essentially is the same message. It's not about wealth gathering. It's not about materialism. It is all about following the faith, following the Guru Granth Sahib Ji and the words of the Gurus. So hopefully I've summarized your point correctly. I just spotted you're gonna put me forward to be Prime Minister of Khalistan. Oh, to be honest, I'm too old and tired to do that. I would be honoured to stand, but you know what? I'm actually looking forward, maybe just to buying a little cabin or building a little cabin somewhere in the hills of Punjab, of Khalistan as it will be, where the sun's shining and a nice rocking chair on the deck, overlooking a nice view in the Khalistan evening sunshine, with a glass of ginger beer, my favourite drink, just sitting there. That's all I need. I don't need to be Prime Minister, but if you need me, I'll be there as always. Jupiter. Oh, all wings of police in India are tightly on Amit Shah. Yeah, of course, Amit Shah's name has been popped up too many times. We all know Amit Shah. His background is really questionable. And I've talked at length in probably years past, actually. In fact, I think I did a couple of pieces actually looking at his history. He is really, as we say in English, a very dodgy character. He's got a really questionable background. So it's unsurprisingly, and his best mates, obviously, with Narendra Modi. So the two of them are, as we say, thick as thieves. They make a very, very dangerous pair. And they're ruling India with a rod of iron. And they know it. Stay safe. Hello, stay safe. You're on both sides, on live and on recorded. They know they can't govern millions and billions of people across India. They know how to govern by the use of chaos. They've got the playbook. They've got their bag of tricks, and they just trotted out at every occasion. Absolutely. Kuldip is back again. Does anyone know? Oh, this is interesting. Yes, Khalistan Football Association. Don't forget that first match on the 15th of August. I know some of you guys have bought tickets. I understand that clearly there are there's loads of you who have bought the tickets. Kuldip is asking, look, we need to get from London up to Willenhall in Coventry, in the Midlands. So yeah, please talk to your Gurdwaras. If you can get groups, if you hire minibuses, share cars, whatever it is, hitchhike, just get up the M1, or is it the M1, M6, I think, to the Midlands. Absolutely. Yeah, please do coordinate. If any of you guys in East London, around the Gurdwaras particularly, if you can organise coaches, buses, minibuses, cars, whatever, do get together and coordinate to get as many people up to attend that first amazingly important football match, the first appearance of Khalistan FA. Don't forget, as you rightly say, stay safe, merchandise, buy your tops and shorts. You'd have to buy the shorts as well, but certainly buy your tops and turn up to support Khalistan. Khalistan is coming home indeed. We look forward to that great debut. I'm really excited about it. I don't even like football, but this whole match is really it's exciting stuff. Stay safe back again. Oh, yes, of course, you're going to the USA from the UK to do the vote in Indianapolis. Well done, Stay Safe. That is what I call dedication. In fact, all of you guys, get on planes. Of course, it's not really the easiest of things to do. And of course, it's a costly exercise, but well done to you, Stay Safe, for getting across Indianapolis. And of course, a reminder to you guys around Indianapolis in North America, if you can get to Indianapolis, get there, get voting. The numbers, I understand, are huge who have voted, and of course, who unsurprisingly have voted for Khalistan. I've had a bit of an inside sort of nod that it's looking good numbers-wise, unsurprisingly, as if it could be anything. So who else? Oh, Bramleen Binder. Apologies if I mispronounced him. Brother, I love you very much, news person. Likewise, much appreciated. It's a lovely comment. Thank you for that. Where are we? Oh, yes, Cam KZ. Yes, the positive role of the Sikh community. Now, I've obviously the last couple of days, and last few days actually, I've highlighted in this interesting involvement of the Sikh community in these protests in New Delhi. It's been extraordinary, actually, I have to say. Because, of course, the Nihangs have been there to try and keep order. And again, it's so reflective of the Sikh faith. They haven't taken sides. They're just there basically doing the police's job. That in itself speaks volumes, because the police have obviously taken one political side. The protesters are on another political side, which has left it for the Sikhs, as always, to be the impartial keepers of the peace. Well done. So yeah, it's been wonderful actually to see that. But as you rightly say, Cam KZ, now we need to turn that power, that gravitas, to push for Khalistan. Of course we do. We need all the Sikh community to unite, because there are still too many Sikhs in our communities that don't care, that are indifferent. They've obviously got important things in their lives to worry about, their jobs, their mortgages, keeping food on the table. I get that. But at the same time, everybody must try and unite and support the whole Khalistan movement, because it can only be pushed over the line if everybody unites to make it happen. So, as you say, Cam KZ, Khalistan Zindabad. And Danny waited again. I'm not going to give Danny any more airtime, but I think you can probably predict what his comment was. The Sikh Jedi is back again. Oh, yes, thank you for this. This is our discussion. Well, we had a discussion. Was it yesterday's show? Or a couple of days ago, we talked about the demographics of Punjab. Thank you, Sikh Jedi, for doing some homework on this. You've been actually to look at, because at the time I was trying to think, what was the percentage of Sikhs within Punjab itself? Well, you've done the research for me. Thank you for this. Under the last census, 2011, Punjab, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh. Punjab is 58%. Haryana is 5%, give or take. And Himachal Pradesh is just over 1%. So for East Punjab as a whole, Sikhs make up about 29%. For Pakistan's Punjab province, there are no recent published figures, but of course it's unsurprisingly very small post-partition. Most actually moved out of West Punjab. So it's about 1%, give or take. So a rough estimate for the percentage of Sikhs in the entire greater Punjab region is 12 to 14%. So it is, yeah, it's a minority, sadly. And in fact, if you watched my podcast last week with Dr. Grau, we talked about, and I just sort of threw out this theoretical premise. I said one of the best ways to get Khalistan quickly is just every Sikh in the world to move to Punjab. and then dominate Punjab, and it's a lot easier. Of course, that's never going to happen. But of course, one of the biggest obstacles at the moment to getting an easy win on Khalistan is this. It's these statistics. It's because Sikhs are so scattered. But let us not forget that the Sikh Empire was a minority of Sikhs. So the precedent, the successful precedent in history is there. Sikhs don't need to be a majority to build a successful country. They've done it before. They've proved it. They've got track record. So yeah, it's interesting stuff. These were some of the live comments from was it a couple of days ago? Yeah, so I just wanted to cover some live comments. So you guys pop these comments into the live feed. Now, I wanted to address a few of those. I was looking at Ask Gagan. You are awesome, bro. You explain very well. It's my pleasure. Thank you for joining us. It's a name I haven't recognised. It's nice of you to join us. Welcome to the show. Hobo. This is an interesting one. The root issue of those protests wasn't about paper leaks; it's the lack of jobs. Yeah, this is actually, I think you've hit something here. Obviously, the headline about the protests was about its exam leaks, it's the pressures of that. But actually, there's the underlying economics of India, and I do talk about this a lot. The underlying economics of India are terrible. The wealth gap, which I have touched on regularly, the wealth gap, seeing the time, we're running out of time. And the wealth gap is enormous. And that, of course, is driving unhappiness, is driving people to take to the streets for whatever premise, whatever reason. So I think that is a very important point. Mr. 403, you talked about resignations. Don't trust the resignations. They'll all be replaced by somebody else with the same agenda. That's the problem. You're absolutely right. Hobo, the irony is calling to use protests as a vehicle for disintegration than dismissing the state security response as misuse of power. There's a lot of nuance in that, and unfortunately, I wanted to talk about this. We don't have time, but maybe I'll come back to that comment when I've got more time, because actually, there's a discussion around that. I don't entirely agree with your comment there, but anyway. Sikh Jedi, oh yes, you did actually ask a specific question here. The way I see it, Sikhs either want to participate in democracy or they want Khalistan. You can't have both. I actually disagree with that. There's nuances there that I want to discuss. We don't have time. And what do I think about Pakistan being behind the Khalistan movement? I have covered that subject regularly, so do refer to some old shows. But in a nutshell, no, because the whole concept of Khalistan, even if it wasn't called Khalistan, the concept of sovereignty goes way, way back, centuries even before Pakistan was even thought of. So no, totally not. Pakistan aligns with it because it suits Pakistan's interests, but Pakistan are not the creators of Khalistan in any way, shape or form. And then some nice comments. Thank you, Bobby, saying excellent reporting. Good man, Grow, or the regular Satsri Akal, saying back to you. Thank you for that. Cool, it's back again. Update on Callum. Yeah, he's still very much there, which is nice to see. Cool, it's back again. Great show as always. CR7 World, Vahiguruji Ka Khalsa, Vahiguruji Ka Fateh, Khalistan Zindabad, absolutely. And this one, and in Punjabi, and because you commented, I did translate it. It's from Akal 6334, and what you said is Vahiguruji Ka Khalsa, Vahiguruji Ki Fateh. And that, I believe, is the final comment. It is. So the final honour does go to Akal 6334. So thank you for that. You commented before, and I'm not being able to read out your comments because it is in Punjabi. But I did make the effort today. So thank you for that. Right. We are 6-7 minutes overdue. Again, another long show, way beyond what it should have been. But I just enjoy being here. I love seeing you guys online. It's always nice to see you. Much appreciated. Do keep your comments coming. Don't forget to comment after the show has sort of finished going live, because I also need those comments to talk about as well as just your live comments. So do appreciate if you guys can pop in once the show's uploaded and done whatever it does, so you can go onto YouTube and then comment through YouTube. That's much appreciated. But that is it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. I will be back tomorrow, which is Thursday. I won't be live, I don't think. I think it will be a pre-recorded show, and I'll probably record at about 9 a.m. UK time. I could go live. That's a possibility. I don't know, but I don't know if you guys will be around at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Well, I tell you what, send me a message. If you want me to broadcast live at 9 a.m., email me, message@satellitv.com. Talking about messages, thank you. I have now received, was it Amric? My mind's gone blank. Yes, I did receive your email and I have responded. Thank you. Because don't forget, our email went down over the weekend. It is now back up, so you can email. I do, of course, read all your emails. Much appreciated. Thank you for all you guys who have emails. But that is it for another day, another long show. We must wrap things up for the day. But God willing, I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks, as always, for all your support. Do send me anything you think I need to talk about, any links, any information, any research, any grassroots material that you discover. But that is it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. I'm going to end the show now, and once I find the end stream button, I'll say goodbye. But I will say my goodbyes. Thanks to you guys. Have a great night. Catch you all tomorrow.